Welcome back, fellas. Today's review is on a spin-off series of Code Geass, Akito the Exiled. The first thing I have to clarify is that this isn't the series. I said had a lot of problems. In the previous video, I'll upload that series once I finished all of the Code Geass series, so stay tuned to see if you guessed the dumpster fire of a series right. But in any case, the video title is pretty much my assessment of Akito the Exiled, the Diet Coke of Code Geass. And just as a famous doctor said,
Just 1 calorie, not evil enough.
quite right, Dr. Evil. This series was a complete mockery of the original series, if I had to be blunt. You know what? I want to use that comparison between Coke and Diet Coke. It really is spot on. I'll explain. Between Coke and Diet Coke, we all know the original is by far the superior soda. Coca-Cola is my favorite soda, and nothing beats a frosty, glass-bottled Coke. The taste is smooth, easy to drink, and goes well with whatever meal you're eating. Diet Coke, on the other hand, is a bit rougher on your taste buds, and has a strong, chemically aftertaste to it that lingers for a bit. But its main selling point was that it had 1 calorie, and was marketed as a healthier choice with little to no difference to the original's taste. Yeah, right. Excluding the fact of how bad sugary drinks are for you, how many of you would opt for a Diet Coke over the original Coke? If there were no downsides, be honest now. I'll assume everyone picked the original. Akito the Exiled functioned in the same way when compared to the original. Out of the cans and poured into 2 identical glasses, they may look the same, but they have vastly different tastes. Akito may look like the original, but it's lacking what made the original so great. Yes, I know it's an unhealthy dose of sugar that made the original taste better, but this is where the comparison ends. Akito the Exiled was nothing more than a shameless, hollow shell of a series, riding on the coattails of the original's massive fan base and popularity, while offering nothing of any substance. I know I use this phrase a lot, but it doesn't make it any less true. This series was all style and no substance. Hell, it didn't even attempt to do anything interesting to keep the audience engaged. For starters, this series takes place in between the time separating the events of Season 1 and Season 2. After the Black Rebellion failed, and Zero was presumed captured and executed, it takes place in another theater of combat between a vassal of Britannia called Euro-Britannia and an alliance of European nations called the Europea Union, the Code Geass analog for the European Union. This would have been interesting to see another part of the world of Code Geass, but they botched it, like in the original series the Japanese called 11s by the Europeans were heavily discriminated against and forced into the front lines as sacrificial pawns to the EU's benefit, where even the EU's native people just see the Japanese people as less than human, making them no different than the Britannians. This is a take into the ugly side of humanity, but this isn't anything original, and is closer to the application of the most minimal of effort the writers would need to contribute to setting a stage for the story. The story focuses on the actions of a special unit called the Wyvern Unit, whose main operations involves exploiting 11s as sacrificial pieces every time the EU armed forces gets completely dominated by the overwhelming combat prowess of Euro-Britannia. Due to the EU taking the war far too lightly, but it's strange. The series' handling of this setting makes no sense to me. The Wyvern unit in the entirety of the series is shown to be the only unit that makes use of the most advanced nightmare frames the EU has developed. The Alexander, a 6th-generation, high-mobility nightmare frame that could switch between an insect-like quadruped mode and a standard bipedal mode, and could be outfitted with all sorts of equipment, depending on the preferences of its assigned pilots. However, in the Wyvern unit before the events of the series kicks off properly, these nightmares were being used as kamikaze machines. Seems like a waste of valuable combat resources to me. But that all changes when one of the main characters of the show, Layla takes full command of the Wyvern unit. She, along with the titular protagonist, Akito, who is the only pilot to have survived all high mortality operations since the Wyvern unit took action, continue to give successful operations eliminating many of the Euro-Britannian forces, giving them a moniker, the Ghost of Hannibal, describing how they appear from behind enemy lines and cause major disruption to the Britannian forces by use of a plot device called Apollo's Chariot, a long-range transport system that circles the globe to perform an orbital drop of Wyvern squads Alexanders behind enemy lines without being detected. This was sort of clever, but to be honest, almost nothing in this show has any of the kind of appeal and intrigue the original had. The plot was just boringly simplistic and unimaginative. The characters are so bland and forgettable. Even the main ones that I could remember were just too poorly written. I wondered what kind of joke writing was this. For starters, Layla is far too emotional and naive for any sort of commander character. I could get that she feels sympathy for the Japanese being exploited, but the way she takes in 3 wayward Japanese teens, that attempted to kidnap and ransom a high-ranking officer in the army, and not immediately planting a cap behind all 3 of their skulls is too stupid of a move. Actually, I don't think she has that kind of clout to stop the army from taking them to be executed, but plot convenience. Not only that, but she entrusted them with 3 state-of-the-art Alexanders that they used to immediately attack her when they were on the field. Speaking of that, she's a commander. There's no reason for her to be out on the front lines anyway, but they make up some nonsense of needing to test some experimental drone operating system. You mean there was nobody else that could have done that? Even then, she's written so inconsistently that I have no idea what sort of character she was supposed to be. All throughout the series, she extols her need to be a soldier, to protect the values she learned from her father, and then at the end of the series, she decides to run off with Akito and the others to become a traveling gypsy. Instead of ascending the military ranks by fighting against Euro-Britannia and making things better for the interned Japanese, that she claimed to have sympathy for. Make this make sense? There's a lot more to say, but I'll leave that for later on in the review, since it's more relevant to that part of this video. Next, there's Akito. He is one of the most hopelessly badly written characters I've ever seen. So he's essentially an emo that wants to find a place to take that eternal nap. He's under a Geass order placed on him by his older brother to end himself, but for some reason, he hasn't done this yet. It's not even explained why he was able to resist the Geass order for so long. Also, upon meeting his brother on the battlefield, he freezes up every time, no matter what sort of friendship event he and the other characters take part in during the series. He always chokes at that same point whenever his brother told him to go take a dirt nap. He comes off as just irritating to watch. The characters in the original series all have their own trauma to deal with, and they did so. Akito does not. He has no growth as a character. Someone has to come in at the last minute to save him before he gets outed by his brother. Even in their final engagement. Shins. I don't know. Lover? Side chick? Convenient woman? Comes in and takes the finishing blow his brother would have dealt him instead, along with her ending Shin in the process. Now, let's talk about his brother, Shin, the main antagonist of this train wreck of a series. He's a Temu version of Itachi from Naruto. Yeah, this is the most apt description of this guy, but unlike Itachi, who had a larger and noble goal in mind for his actions. Shin's just a psychopath who fancies himself the victim of his environment. That got his hands on a Geass power, and thinks that he was doing people he loves a favor by telling them to end themselves. In some cases, it's even insulting that he has the same type of Geass Lelouch had. It's like the writers had no idea how to write this character. So they copy and pasted some of Lelouch's mannerisms onto him, like how he activates his Geass. He's a type of character that I like to call the pufferfish. We all know the pufferfish. It's a naturally small fish that inflates itself to appear larger, to fool predators into backing away. An animal that uses false perception, then. A character that has a forced blow up that didn't suit them naturally, for example. His exchange with Julius Kingsley, the way he jumped to conclusions that Julius was Zero by saying his tactics were similar to Zero's. Even though Zero never used social media to instill fear and create hysteria in Japan. Even knowledge about Lelouch as the 11th prince. Who on earth would bring up information about a prince that was presumed deceased several years earlier to Shin? This was the kind of blow-up Shin had, being portrayed as more intelligent and calculating than he actually was, when he was just a second-rate swindler that couldn't accomplish almost anything without having his Geass. But this was the difference between him and Lelouch. Even though they had a similar Geass, Lelouch used his Geass only for big plays, and made the most of the abilities of everyone he had had under his command. Geass or otherwise. This dude used it for almost everything, and just ran all of his forces into the ground without getting too far. And just to further show that this guy was just a small fry, he never did anything tactically or strategically useful with his Geass to gain any sort of edge against Akito and his comrades. He just ran around in that gaudy and impractical nightmare frame he had and just tried to push through everything by force. A complete trash antagonist character. Then there are the three youths Layla saved. But I can't even remember their names. One was a musclehead, big brother character. One was someone who liked to detonate himself, not in the fun way. But he was also somehow a tech genius? A strange amalgamation of character traits, to be honest. And the last one I'll just call Samurai Girl, who may or may not have some feelings for Akito. I don't know. The whole thing was rushed and forced. They were just boring and forgettable. Even the rest of the staff under Layla's command were just fixtures to the background. And even the red-haired guy who was an enemy turned friend after some sort of weird introspection of himself. This crap doesn't even happen in real life. Now, let's talk about the plot devices used in this series. As stated before, there was the Apollo's Chariot high-speed transport carrier. Then there was something called the RHS system, which linked the consciousness of the Alexander pilots in a sort of network to improve cooperation or something. But the main component of the system is Akito's Alexander, and it has some kind of berserker mode on it. I don't know. They shoehorned this weird system and gave it some retarded background explanation about how it's able to interfere with coordinate positions due to the perception of every living human on Earth or something like that. It was used to drop Ashley, the red-haired guy, onto the EU transport, attacking his base. This was a plot device that used a lot of convoluted explanative nonsense to justify its wide range of effects, from increasing the combat capabilities of its linked pilots, to being able to transfer from one set of spatial coordinates to another. But here's the thing. The RHS coordinate transfer function renders Apollos' chariot obsolete, doesn't it? Why not seek to develop this system further, to improve the effectiveness of the Wyvern unit and other units to push back Euro-Britannia? If this system works like that, then not only could you arrive at the enemy's blind spot instantaneously, but they could also retreat just as fast. The perfect system for blitzkrieg warfare. But I think I know why. These writers broke the balance of the world's series of events with their nonsensical plot devices. Let's not forget, this series takes place in between the time frame of Season 1 and Season 2 of the original series. I don't think that kind of technology should exist at that stage. Another out-of-place technology was the advanced weapons used by the Alexanders, as well as the biggest eyesore being Shin's Centaur Nightmare Frame. You know what? The Alexanders are also out of place. From a technological point of view, in the original series, the world's first true transformable nightmare frame was credited to being the Tristan. Now, it could just be Britannia propaganda. But it's clear that the writers decided not to sweat those details. They went for over-the-top fight scenes, hoping the audience would forget about the inconsistencies created by their story. Now then, I included this separately because it was rather long and was a whole topic by itself. But another character who was the subject of a blow-up was Layla herself. It may sound like she was a highly capable commander, and maybe she was, but I just couldn't see it. At no point in the series runtime did she make any sort of brilliant strategy that turned the tables against enemy forces. I'm not being biased because she's a female character either. But I think it's very hard to lose. When you have a literal castle with countless high-tech fortifications as your base of operations. That is also decked out in state-of-the-art technologies like the latest nightmare frames. Advanced 3D printing facilities that could make whatever components you need for new weapons for your nightmares. Or anything else you may require. Along with the all-important Apollo's chariot. That could be used as an escape vehicle if things get really bad. I'm sorry. But there's absolutely no one that could lose easily, with these sorts of assets available to them from the start. This is far different from the original series, where resourcefulness was the name of the game. Lelouch as Zero needed to make do with the most minimal of resources, and as the series progressed, securing more resources through strategic victories over Britannian forces and negotiations with powerful backers. They managed to secure more powerful assets to become a powerhouse of an organization. Everything from top-of-the-line nightmares to advanced ships. This series has nothing of the sort, with regards to its cast of heroes. To simplify, Layla had an asset blow-up, giving her a far easier and uninteresting time than Lelouch in the main series, who Layla was supposed to mirror in this series, while Shin had an intelligence blow-up, just to make him seem more intimidating than he actually was. But Layla also had one more confoundedly infuriating blow-up. Her Geass. If you could call that thing a Geass, as clearly stated in the lore. A Geass has one set psychological function available to the user, but the user must abide by the restrictions and limitations of said Geass contract. What kind of Geass rewinds time? This isn't a Geass. It's a disgustingly blatant piece of plot armor. Speaking of the Geass, let's move on to that now. I have no idea what that thing was that gave Shin his Geass. But this is again stated that only the 2 code holders could bestow Geass. This is the writers taking their own liberties with the lore again? No, they are contradicting and warping the lore. Then there's that strange woman who looks a lot like C2. But the way she talks is like some external entity outside the world. That while having no interest in the world. Still has some interaction with some people living in the world. This is clearly one of those convoluted concepts. That is supposed to sound philosophically deep, but it's really stupid. It reflects poorly on the writing team. You sure you want to put this stuff in an OVA series with only 5-hour-long episodes? This is poor planning. This title is a small spin-off. Not something where you put these sorts of concepts that require a lot of time to properly explain. This is a series where you could have gotten more with less. There wasn't a need to cram all of this nonsensical story points into the series. A majority of the relevant terms and concepts were already covered in the original series. It means that there should have been more focus placed on the plot's refining and the strategic battles that the original series is known for. But lastly, there's one more poorly handled element of this crap series. It's the introduction of Lelouch and Suzaku into this series. This is just the most disgusting kind of bait and switch you could find. They introduced 2 of the most iconic characters in the original show to bring in more attention. Then they had to quarantine them after accomplishing that goal. Fair enough, given what these two accomplished. Taking over the world in the original series, even then, with Lelouch as Julius Kingsley, planning operations against the Wyvern Squad, and Suzaku with Lancelot on the front lines fighting Akito and the other three. Yeah, it's a one-sided massacre of the Wyvern Squad, and anything less would have probably caused fan outrage. Sinking interest in the rest of the series, I don't think there's anything else I need to cover in this review. But final thoughts. Yes, Code Geass. Akito the Exiled is just that much of a piece of garbage that brought much shame to the franchise, where committing seppuku wouldn't be enough. While it had the clamp character designs that we know and associate with the series, it focused too much on poorly written drama, convoluted concepts, and an oversimplified plot. Shin just wanted to see the world burn, but he's no Heath Ledger Joker. For starters, Shin's grand plan and the main plot of Akito the Exiled was to load the Apollo's chariot launch system with explosives to attack Britannia's capital. Pendragon, to assassinate the Emperor. This is incredibly stupid. Britannia, in that world, is one of the most advanced countries that exists. The float system, the Flea warheads, the 7th generation nightmare frames like Lancelot. All of them technologies that could guarantee Britannia's victory. Did he honestly think the Britannian homeland wouldn't have any sort of advanced defense or interception system in place? The quickest way to slay a beast is to chop off its head. Sure, but if it was that simple, one of the other more advanced countries under Britannian threat would have done so. Don't you think? In the first place, the only reason Apollo's chariot was effective was because it was launched into battlefields. That wouldn't have the sophisticated detection systems that would have given early warning and scrambled interception. He can't be serious, not to mention, it's a single rocket. Not like it's a volley of missiles. He must be really high to think that simplistic kind of plan would work. This is poor plot development at its finest. Oh, right. There was some small subplot to turn Layla into a martyr, so her commanding officer could launch a coup against the current government and seize power for himself. This really is poor planning. This series reminded me heavily of what I said about my previous review of Tekkemon Blade, where the first series was an absolute masterpiece, and the follow-up was incredibly lackluster to the point of it being so insulting when compared to the original. That many members of the fanbase don't recognize it as a part of the series. It's clear that this series was handed to a writing team who was either too lazy to write something in line with the established themes and concepts of the original series, or just didn't care enough, and thought that over-the-top nightmare fight scenes would be enough to satisfy the fans. The nightmare fights were fine. Nothing spectacular, and the CG wasn't the worst thing I've seen. At the very least, Sunrise has its animation studio quality up to snuff, but it doesn't have a majority of the elements that made the original series so popular. It's almost as though they're insulting the fans, saying this garbage is good enough, and we'll give them our money by buying the model kits and figures anyway. Eat this slop, you otaku pigs. I can't help but feel this is the underlying message. It isn't just Code Geass, but the mecha genre as a whole has been going in a downward slump in terms of story quality, where almost every mecha series is just a glorified commercial for model kit sales. Write in the comments if you feel the same. But anyway, the original series set a standard that any future series that seeks to call itself Code Geass must follow. I'll use another Coke soda example. You're not going to pop a can of Coke and expect it to taste like anything other than Coke, right? Well, Akito the Exiled is like popping that can of Coke and tasting Dr. Pepper instead. Looks similar, but completely different from what you wanted and expected in a bad way. You're going to get angry, right? I'll end the video here. Like and subscribe for more. Till next time. Bye.